Well, hello. Hi. How are you? Welcome to a podcast by George, a special live edition. And it's, kind of a special day. It's Friday, obviously. Happy Friday, everybody. We don't do a lot of live podcast by George episodes, but I wanted to do one today because we've got some more breaking news, and it's from our good friend. It's time for Friday with Laura, as I call it. It's a podcast by George visiting with the folks, and Laura Bellin specifically from Bleeding Heartland. And she's got another big story, an update really on a story that we had earlier on podcast by George. And then I got a couple of other things that I want to talk about. So let's bring her in here and click the little button and say hi to Laura Bellin.
Hi, thanks, George. Always a pleasure.
Well, thanks for coming on. And I want to kind of get you started here by reading this most recent post on Bleeding Heartland. And I want to put in my plug at the beginning and at the end, folks. Go to Bleeding Heartland, become a patron, subscribe to the blog there, and you can get this news as it breaks, because even as new as this is, it's already a day or so old. But I get this. I mean, this just blows me away. The headline says, exclusive, Iowa medical directors 45% raise. We talked about that earlier. Violated state policy. The first paragraph, Iowa medical director Dr. Caitlin Pedotti received a 45% raise this summer, despite a state policy limiting within-grade pay increases. Records obtained by Bleeding Heartland show those damnable records. I got to think somebody in the governor's office is probably thinking of those, and Laura dives deep and gets this information out of there. So, Laura, we talked about this before, but there's an explicitly stated kind of no way around it policy that prohibits this type of thing. Am I right?
That's correct. The Department of Administrative Services, which handles human resources for state government, had issued a memo to state agency directors in June, reminding them that as they considered pay raises for employees with the next fiscal year, which was about to start on July 1st, that they had discretion to give a within-grade pay increase of up to 3%. And the person who is the acting director of that Department of Administrative Services, Paul Trombino, he also works in the governor's office. He has a senior position there of chief operating officer. And it turned out that he was one of the key people who was promoting the idea of giving a big raise to Caitlin Pedotti. So it's not a question of whether he was aware of this policy. He himself reminded state agency directors about the policy, and then less than a month later, he pushed for this huge 45% raise. Initially, he had suggested a raise that would have been more in the 30% range. And then after discussing things with the incoming director of the Department of Public Health, they decided to push it up to 45%. And, I just find it kind of discouraging. This, by the way, is completely separate from all of the overtime pay that Dr. Pedotti and the other senior people at the Department of Public Health have received, tens of thousands of dollars this year in overtime pay that normally their positions would not be eligible for, except that the governor's emergency proclamations related to COVID-19 have allowed some state employees who normally wouldn't be eligible for overtime to receive it for pandemic-related work.
Laura's a great journalist, and she's a practicing journalist, and she's on top of this. I'm a kind of an old school guy that is trying to get back into it. Number one rule, don't ever assume anything. But I'm looking at this story, Laura, and I'm assuming that a lot of this policy probably came from fiscally conservative Republicans that wanted to control state spending and the amount of raises and that type of thing. And then to me, I had to chuckle a little bit. Again, I'm just assuming that this policy was drafted in large part by Republicans, and then it's the Republican governor that isn't following it. Now, am I assuming too much?
Well, I actually should go back and look. The administrative rules regarding this Department of Administrative Services, they've been in effect for quite a while, I think. I'm not aware of any recent changes in that, but I think it's just a longstanding practice in state government that it was difficult to give people raises of more than 3% without having some kind of promotion that pulled them up to a higher pay grade. And in fact, even if they're moved to a higher pay grade, the state rules limit the raise. So you're allowed to give raises of up to 5% for every pay grade that they go up compared to the previous position that they had. So, even then she would have had to have bump up 9 pay grades to be able to get a 45% raise. There were some other problems that I found when I was going through the record. She had actually already received, Dr. Padati had, a 3% merit pay increase in December of 2019, before the pandemic even happened. So under the state rules, you're not eligible for more than one raise in a 12-month period. So really, she shouldn't have been eligible for any kind of a raise before December of 2020. But they made an exception for her on that as well. And I mean, I asked the state agencies in question, why was an exception made to policy for her? And they just didn't give me any answer at all. They either ignored the email or just said, we don't have anything to add to that.
Well, that's the part that I wanted to get to next. Just a little bit of inside baseball, maybe with journalists, the reporting in the governor's office and that type of thing. But they know that you're on this. They know that you're following this. I mean, at some point, maybe earlier on, quite a while ago, somebody could have said, oopsie, we didn't know we were violating state policy. We probably ought to rescind that. We ought to backtrack a little bit, approach this a little differently, use a little common sense and handle this raise differently, but they're not doing this. The governor's aware of the issue. Am I correct? And she's standing by her position.
Yes, I mean, the governor's office approved the idea of the raise. When I first was reporting on the raise, this was in early August, I got the records at the end of July that showed that Dr. Padati had gotten this enormous raise. It was way out of line with what other people received in state government. Most people in state government get a small raise, like maybe 1% or 1.5% with each new fiscal year. That's typical. But I could see that at the beginning of this fiscal year that her pay went way up. So when I started asking questions about that, I just didn't get any answers at all about why it happened. Then after I published initially about Dr. Padati's raise, the incoming director of the Department of Public Health, Kelly Garcia, she then contacted other media, including the Des Moines Register and Radio Iowa, and she said she was the one who suggested this raise, that she felt that Dr. Padati was underpaid compared to other physicians. Actually, the records show that this aide to Governor Reynolds, Paul Trombino, seems to have been the first person to suggest a raise. I mean, one thing that I've been wondering, and I haven't found any written documents that support this idea, but Kelly Garcia did say, when speaking to Radio Iowa in August, she said this was about retention. And so it made me wonder whether Dr. Padati said, I'm going to walk and take some private sector job if you don't give me a big raise. Again, I haven't found any documentation that supports that. But when somebody says we gave someone a big raise because of retention, it does make you think that maybe they were worried that she would leave. Of course, I don't think she's managed the pandemic well in any case. So I don't think it would be any big loss for the state of Iowa if she did leave.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. That's the insult to the injury part of this. And I wanted to talk about the governor's coming back to some news conferences this week and what's going on currently. But I also wanted to just a little deeper in your article here. I wanted to reinforce this for folks. Maybe Padati's looking to go somewhere else. The doctors make a lot of money. There's a lot of opportunity, I suppose, for people like her. But if I'm reading this correctly, Laura, the little 3% merit increase that she got in December 2019 brought Padati's salary then to $183,310 by us taxpayers. And now with this raise, Padati is making $240,006 a year. Okay, you think, well, we're in the midst of a pandemic. Well, how are we doing, folks? I'm looking at some news coverage. It's telling me that we're 28th in the world. The state of Iowa is in our handling of the pandemic crisis. If we were a country out of all the other governments in the globe, we would be 28th, let alone if among 50 United States. I mean, it's going really bad. And the governor is digging her heels in to give the state medical director during this disaster a 45% increase.
Right. And also Dr. Padati has declined offers from people, academics and doctors with the University of Iowa have offered many times to help her and help the Department of Public Health. And she just hasn't been interested in accepting that help. And ever since April, the Department of Public Health has been saying, well, we have this strategy of managing and containing the virus, and we're going to expand testing. Well, obviously, we were able to test our way out of this problem. The contact tracing efforts have been minimal. We've just never had enough contact tracers. We've never had enough The case investigation is really lacking. And I mean, that even when things weren't quite as bad in the summer, the people who study this across the country said Iowa never had enough contact tracers. And now we just have this explosion of cases and hospitalizations. And the Department of Public Health is just not keeping up. So I find it very disappointing that she would be rewarded. And again, I just want to mention the overtime, because I mean, her salary this year is going to be well above $300,000 when you consider the overtime pay that she's received. And yes, I'm sure that she and her team are putting in the long hours, but many people are putting in long hours, and many healthcare workers are not only putting in more hours this year, but they're getting furloughs and pay cuts. I mean, a lot of doctors and nurses in this state are actually getting less pay this year, despite their crushing workload and also the stress of dealing with the conditions under this pandemic. So, I mean, I really question the value that's being placed on the work of the epidemiology team at the Iowa Department of Public Health. And with our low population density, we should never be doing as badly as we're doing. I mean, we've had since September, our new cases per capita have been higher than much more densely populated areas like New York, New Jersey, and areas that were hit very hard early in the pandemic and are doing much better now. I mean, in New York City, they have about a 3% positivity rate on their COVID-19 tests, and we're many times higher than that.
Well, and that's where the 28th in the world statistic comes from. It's on a per capita basis. I mean, it just, and it's black and white. I mean, it's a pretty clear statistic, folks. And common sense has to prevail here a little bit. When you look at these, like a state medical director, this is go time for them. This is what they're experienced and trained for. I mean, a pandemic is a possibility. It's something they should know about, be prepared to handle, take under their normal job responsibilities. I don't know how overtime comes into it. I'm thinking of my own experience. Like I'm in a newsroom and there's a prison riot down in Fort Madison, and I got to jump on a plane and go down there, which I had to do back in the day. I don't get paid to fly on airplanes. I mean, I might need a little overtime here, especially to go to a prison. I mean, God, I don't know if I should be doing that. I think there should be some more money for me. I mean, it just violates common sense, which brings me to the next part of common sense, these news conferences. Now, the she's back off the campaign trail, right? I mean, she's back in the office at work. She's wearing a mask now. She wasn't a lot of times out on the campaign trail, if I was looking at the video and all that correctly. And you're getting an opportunity to actually watch the news conferences live, because I am. Right. I mean, she had one in prime time this week, which is laughable. You're still not allowed in the room, right?
I'm not allowed in the room. I'm not allowed on the phone line. I mean, the speech that she gave in prime time was not really a press conference because nobody asked any questions. But no, I'm not allowed to ask any questions. I'm not allowed to be part of the governor's press conferences at all. So, and in fact, even she had 2 this week, and she really took very few questions. She spends a lot of time talking, and they bring in the guest speakers who spend a lot of time. And then she took a few questions from the people in the room, but even the people in the room had a lot more questions than what she answered.
As always, and that's one of the reasons I can't stand. My wife watches every minute of that stuff. Honest to God, I can't. I don't know how you do it. I know you do. I mean, I just can't watch it. I don't like being hosed like that. I mean, that's the way that I feel when I'm watching it. I just want to yell at the TV. I can watch a little bit of it. Her voice grates on me, but I don't want to pick on her for that, because I mean, you can't control what your voice sounds like. But on the common sense part of this, here's what I see coming down the track, and it's not hard to see, and it's already happened on the federal level. And I see it coming into the state of Iowa very soon. And we're already being told, well, we had no idea that it was going to get like this. Nobody knew that it was going to get this bad. We didn't know what measures we should take. Well, that's not true. What we're experiencing right now was predicted by Fauci, particularly from almost day one, that if we didn't practice the proper mitigation procedures, including mask wearing on a federal, state, and local level, this is where we were going to be, and we're headed to a worse place if we don't do something about it now. But I'm starting to hear that, starting to sense that as we move into the dark days of winter.
Well, I mean, the epidemiology team and the public health researchers at the University of Iowa, they said that they submitted reports to the governor's office and the Iowa Department of Public Health in April and May, and they predicted all of this. They said if we loosen up on the restrictions and it becomes widespread, they said that coronaviruses can have a very strong seasonal effect, and it could be a lot worse in the fall and winter with the spread, and that the hospitals could be overwhelmed. So everything that they predicted is coming to pass. And we had months to prepare for this. I mean, this isn't like New York City in April where they got slammed before they even knew how widespread and when the testing wasn't available. But we've had this testing available. We have over 100 active outbreaks right now in Iowa nursing homes. And that doesn't even include the assisted living and senior living communities that the Department of Public Health doesn't release information on because they don't count those as long-term care. We should never be having, I mean, if the employees there had the proper PPE, and if we had controlled community spread better, we should never be having this many nursing home outbreaks at this stage in the pandemic. I mean, it's terrible and a crushing loss of life. And I found it particularly upsetting yesterday. You know, I did appreciate that the governor said on Monday that she and her kids and grandkids are not getting together for Thanksgiving, because I think that is a good message to send. Like, we actually need to hunker down and do things a little differently now. I was disappointed yesterday when one of the reporters asked her at the press conference, well, what's your advice for people as we're moving into the holiday season about gatherings? And she kind of said the same thing she always does, like, well, people, you just need to be mindful and just, you know, be careful who you're spending time around and make sure you keep social distance. I mean, let's get real. I mean, if you have people over for Thanksgiving, no one's social distancing. I mean, you're sitting around a table eating together. So, and it's not, I mean, we have good news on vaccines right now. So this isn't something, we don't have to change our behavior for the whole rest of our lives. Like, we have to get through this flu season, and maybe in 4 to 6 months when the vaccines become more widely available, we just need to get through this time. So I wish that we would hear from people just more of a sense of urgency, people in leadership, like, just for this year, you need to not gather with people outside your household. Don't have your holiday parties and your holiday celebrations, and put it off for some other time. And it's unfortunate that we don't get that message.
I'm with you, Laura. I'm kind of an old hard ass anyway. And I mean, my childhood was different from a lot of people. Believe me, I could tell you some horror stories, but I've been telling everybody that as we approach the holidays, that if we don't do exactly what you're talking about, you could refer to this as the patty cake pandemic. I mean, honest to God, everybody loves their kids, old gummers like me, everybody loves their grandkids. But I talk to people basically that are telling me, if it comes down to me not being able to spend time with my beloved golden child grandchildren over the holidays, particularly, I'm just going to die. Well, okay. Well, how about everybody else around you that you might infect? And honest to God, like we talked on the earlier podcast, if people could go to a bomb shelter in the Blitz and live down there for a couple of months, we can get through the wintertime by not sitting down and gorging ourselves at a family dinner. I mean, just do it, people. I mean, try to negate the effects of the patty cake pandemic. Well, okay.
Yeah, well, someone I follow on Twitter, Ruby Bodeker, she ran for the Iowa House in a district that includes Benton County. That's right next to Lynn County, Cedar Rapids area. She has a child in preschool with 16 kids in the preschool class, and 2 of the 16 kids have already lost grandparents to COVID-19 this fall. Yeah. And so it's not worth it. You know, those kids, I mean, I understand that people want to see their grandkids, but like, think about the birthday parties and the weddings, you know, and the future celebrations that you might have in future years if people in your family don't die in this coming winter. And again, like, I'm hopeful that by this time next year, vaccines will be more widely available and we can go back to something more like a normal human interaction. But right now, it's just not a good time to be doing that.
I got a couple of other quick hitters for you, a couple of fun things to discuss. And folks, we didn't chat beforehand, so I'm gonna these things are going to be new to Laura. It'll be fun to talk about this. But before we leave this latest article, this latest posting on your blog, anything else you want to talk about on this, or anything else that's coming up?
No, I think it's just, I mean, I think it's important to talk to people who understand how state government works. I mean, this was an example of where I didn't know, I haven't worked in state government myself. So I actually didn't know that there was this rule about 3% within grade pay increases. That was something that a reader who had experience with state government flagged for me. And that's why I was able to then request the records related to job reclassifications and the pay grade and what the official guidance was on within grade pay increases. So I always appreciate tips from readers and ideas of things that I can research more. So I just think it's really important to understand how things work.
I got it. Again, this wasn't scripted, folks, but this kind of takes me to the next point that I wanted to talk about, which I'm out on a bike ride yesterday, and I'm looking at some of these flags, and they're at half mast. And why the hell are the flags at half mast? Like everybody, when you see it, you run it through your mind. What's going on? I mean, that's not 9/11. It's not Thanksgiving. So why are the flags at half mast? Well, Roger Jepson died. I don't know if anybody followed that in the news or not, but Laura, I predate you somewhat. I'm a little older. I'm going to take you back to your childhood maybe. But Roger Jepson, when I was at WHO, was brought down basically by some reporting that was based on kind of what you're talking about. I think somebody gave a report or something. And I'll give folks the background of this. Roger Jepson, a one-term U.S. Senator from the state of Iowa. I think he was one term.
One term.
Was up for re-election. And at WHO, we had a Washington reporter, outstanding, Diana Winthrop. And I think somebody gave Diana some information. What they gave her were some credit card records dating back, I don't know, to the 70s anyway, when it was the Wild West, when prostitution was legal basically in the state of Iowa with these massage parlors. Well, anyway, Roger Jepson, one of the first big Reaganite golden child family values U.S. senators, he'd been to one of these places, not once, but several times, and she had the goods on him. And again, I think somebody, and that's the way a lot of good reporting takes place. Doesn't matter if it's deep throat or this, police cases too. I always tell people, how most people how most people get arrested, end up in prison? Ex-girlfriends, ex-wives. I mean, it's not great investigative work. I mean, it's somebody giving somebody something. Well, so Roger Jepson goes down in defeat, which is noteworthy in itself. But Diana Winthrop got fired.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, from WHO and the station managers. And I can say this because they don't own it anymore and the station's not there. But I got a feeling, folks, they were Republicans. They didn't like it. We were privately owned at the time, and Diana got fired for running that story. And it was kind of the twilight of my career. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I didn't want to be any part of that. I didn't like it. Neither did Bob Wilbanks. It was a bad deal all the way around. But anyway, long story short, well, there's a little bit more to this story from my perspective. The flags are at half mast now because of a one-term U.S. senator that got caught at a massage parlor in 1984, I think it was. I mean, it was back their ways. Okay.
If people don't remember, he was actually the last sitting U.S. senator from Iowa to lose. He lost to Tom Harkin in that 1984 race. And that was a year, even though Ronald Reagan carried the state of Iowa, Jepson was not able to be reelected as the U.S. senator. And that scandal was a big reason. I mean, Tom Harkin ran a good campaign in other ways, but I didn't remember who broke the story, and I certainly didn't know she was fired. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
Did she go on to work elsewhere in journalism?
Oh, she was syndicated. I mean, she was. We hired her, and some other people did. KDTH up in Dubuque, kind of a Jepson stronghold, also ran the story, and then she went on to other things. And unfortunately, God rest her soul, Diana Winthrop is no longer with us. Rest in peace, Diana. But maybe the final point that I wanted to make about these flags flying at half mast, because it torqued me off on a couple of levels, but in this one in particular, in 2013, Terry Branstad, governor for life in the state of Iowa, is still governor, and Barack Obama comes out with a request. Basically, he would like to have state governments around the country fly the flag at half mast in recognition of the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination. Mm-hmm. Guess who didn't do it? Terry Branstad.
I didn't remember that. That's interesting.
Well, nobody knew it. I raised hell about it because I thought, why aren't the flags at half mast? I contacted the governor's office, got stonewalled. I wasn't like you. I wasn't a practicing journalist and they didn't have any connections or any way to get in there. I'd been out of the business for so long. I contacted the Des Moines Register and raised hell about it at the time and said, why don't you go find out why that isn't being done? The president requested it. I mean, and they didn't have to do it. That's the one thing about it. And Branstad didn't do it. And I get that, but I thought it was worthy of a news story anyway, but it
was
never saw the light of day.
I didn't know about it. Now you got me interested. Maybe I'll go and see what the records say about that. The current governor's office is really terrible. They just basically stopped complying with the open records law. I have records requests outstanding from April that the governor's office hasn't fulfilled. So the rest of state government at least still is complying with the open records law, even if they're sometimes slow about it. But the governor's office is just a nightmare. But Terry Branstad's papers are all now in the state archive. So those are all still subject to open records requests. So maybe I'll look at that. I know I didn't. I'm even a little surprised. I would have thought that Terry Branstad's partisanship maybe didn't quite rise to that level, but that's disappointing to hear.
Well, I never heard that I never got anywhere with it. I don't know that he did it because of partisanship. I didn't know if he did it. It comes back to that question we always talk about, Laura, the movie Casino. Was he too dumb or was he in on it? I don't know. Hell, maybe he wasn't aware of it. Maybe, but it was a request from the president. I saw it published. They should have known. It had to be purposeful in my mind, but I was never able to confirm that. And the register, for whatever reason, kind of took the approach, well, hell, he can do whatever he wants to. They're state offices and state flags. You don't want to run it, that's his prerogative. And I'm like, well, okay, great. And so talking about the Kennedy assassination. Now, I got a couple of, we're doing this live, and I'll post it on a recorded basis also so people can watch it. But I got a couple of podcasts coming up that I like. I've even rewatched them. I got the Gerald Posner coming up, probably the greatest living author, I think, on the Kennedy assassination. Of course, Laura's dad was heavily involved in that as the they always called him a junior.
He was one of 8 counsel. He was a junior counsel. There were some senior lawyers, and then there were a bunch of 30-something lawyers, and he was one of those.
Well, and junior counsel usually means that they did all the work.
Yeah,
David
they did a lot of the work. They did quite a bit of the work.
What a great attorney he was, and what a great thing that he did for the country and his work with that. And he got so much grief from it because of these dumbass conspiracy theories. And I talked to Posner about that specifically, trying to determine if anything new, any nugget had been dug up, if there was anything that would unravel what your dad came to conclude in regards to the Kennedy assassination. And no, there isn't. There really isn't anything new at all. The one thing that we talked about on the podcast that is somewhat new, but it's not even that new. It might be in the last 5 to 10 years or so. The Warren Commission, the sequence of shots on the Zapruder film, they didn't have the timing of it right. They weren't even sure, I don't think, of the exact sequence. It's pretty much been determined now that of the 3 shots, one of them was fired before the Zapruder film even rolled. And it was the shot that missed. So there was no reaction from anybody in the motorcade when they came from behind the tree so that you could actually see them, because it was just a noise at that point and nobody knew what it was. I think you might be able to see a bystander's head turn or something on the Zapruder film. But Max Holland, an investigator down there in Dallas, has come to the conclusion. Now, Posner thought that Oswald hit a tree limb. And I always looked at that and I thought, this guy's he was a marksman in the Marine Corps. I mean, he was a nut, but I don't know the dude be shooting into a tree. That didn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Well, right before the tree or off to the side, there's an overhanging street light. One of those red, white, and green, red, yellow, green street lights on an arm. And he's come to the conclusion that the reason that first shot was never found, hit the curb, hit a guy's face, basically a piece of the curb flew up and hit him in the face, was because he hit that arm, hit that traffic light. And a ricochet is what hit, I think the guy's last name was Teague. And that's where the first shot went. So, I mean, that's it still doesn't change the outcome, doesn't change anything about the lack of a conspiracy or anything like that. And we talk about that coming up, and I've got that one recorded. And again, I wanted to mention that because of your dad's connection.
Gerald Posner's book is great. It's called Case Closed. But another book that I really recommend to people interested in the Kennedy assassination is a book by Philip Sheenan. He's a former investigative reporter for the New York Times. It's called A Cruel and Shocking Act. It came out in 2013. And it's really an outstanding history of the Warren Commission itself, as well as history of the Kennedy assassination. But he talks about how they went down to Dallas and some of the experiments they were doing just to see, you know, what could certain things, would they have been audible from the school book depository building? Could Oswald have gotten down all those staircases and gotten away in the length of time that he had? And anyway, it's a really fascinating book. And he does talk a lot about the ballistic evidence as well. And he talks about the internal debates within the Warren Commission. There were people, including my father, who really wanted to release a lot more information to the public, including from the autopsy. And they knew that if you were going to keep the autopsy sealed, that was going to look like a cover-up. But a lot was done out of deference to the Kennedy family that I think, you know, nowadays maybe people wouldn't show as much deference. But I mean, like Jackie Kennedy, who was a grieving widow, but also a key eyewitness and ear witness to the events, she was not even really fully properly interviewed by the police. I mean, it's unfortunate. Of course, nobody would want to be in that situation, but it was really important for the investigators to be able to ask some of those questions, and it wasn't done properly right away. So, I mean, the people on the Warren Commission, there were a lot of internal debates about how things should be handled and what should be made public.
It was a different age, a different time. I mean, and I'm also struck by the fact that Jack Ruby, what he claimed was he was trying to save Jackie the rigors of having to go through a trial, basically. Right. And that's why he jumped down there, stuck that pistol in Oswald's guts and shot him.
And he had cancer.
Yeah, and then he died of, you know, and it's funny because you can deal with all these conspiracy theories. You mentioned the book. I go to Posner's book, Case Closed. I also Vincent Bugliosi had a book, Reclaiming History. My God, it is this thick. It has got indexes and footnotes and a CD enclosed to it. And if you ever come across anything like what Laura and I are talking about, and you have a question in your own mind, I mean, a quick thumb through, and I mean, it's covered. I mean, there's no angle of this thing that can be discussed or brought up that he hasn't investigated, including the book that Laura mentioned in Posner. And it can't be understated or overstated the significance of that Kennedy assassination, because like Gerald Posner and I have discussed, if you believe that dark, shadowy forces were at work within the United States government in collaboration with the mafia or Russia or something like that, and killed a sitting U.S. president and got away with it and then kept it quiet for going on 16 years. I mean, honest to God, think of your worldview and perspective on the coronavirus as an example compared to other people. I mean, it is really important. And the other thing I kind of wanted to promote a little bit, and I can't even remember the exact context that I wanted to put it in, other than he's a muckraker like you. And I love that term. And it's Matt Tybee with the Rolling Stone, the great reporter. He just won the IF Stone. He just won the Izzy Award this year. And of course, he's had brilliant reporting on the 2008 financial crisis that even made people like me able to understand. He's coming up on a podcast by George, and he's going to talk about the election just passed and politics in general, and also the media's role in all of this. And he's interesting, Laura, because he's doing kind of exactly what you're doing, not only reporting wise, reminds me a lot of your work, because he gets into these details. It's, my God, that's where the answer is, though. But he is, even though he's still affiliated with Rolling Stone, he's taking the jump from legacy media, magazine employment, basically, to Substack. He's going to an employment-only, or a subscription-only model on Substack, you know, kind of similar to what Bleeding Heartland is doing with its blog and Patreon, trying to get paid patrons for his coverage, for his writing only, because as we all know, these major metropolitan dailies and even smaller dailies that we might be familiar with, they are collapsing. There's no space left for these folks, and he's made the leap. And Glenn Greenwald did this past week. He left The Intercept And which also reminds me, and we're running out of time. Have you seen anything further other than the Intercept coverage on the Eric Branstad
I haven't,
scandal?
I didn't, I
Yeah.
mean, I saw a few people asked Terry Branstad about it, and he just said, oh, that article was just all garbage, but he didn't specifically refute anything from it. So I wanted to mention one other person who's on Substack is Liz Lenz, who was fired a couple of months ago by the Cedar Rapids Gazette. She was a really good columnist for the Cedar Rapids Gazette and was fired, and you can subscribe to her work there. I mean, I really cherish my editorial independence. I have to tell you, owning my own platform, it's so nice if I decide I want to dig into a story like this Padati raise. I don't have to get clearance from someone. I don't have to worry about some editor spiking it and saying, look, this is too inside baseball and people aren't really going to care. I can just go and follow the money and see and follow the records. And a lot of mainstream media, a reporter wouldn't have the freedom to spend the time that I would spend, and probably wouldn't get the column space to pursue a story like that. So I do appreciate it. I always encourage people to support the newspapers. It's important for us to have strong newspapers in Iowa, but also, do support independent journalism, because it's really important to have that editorial freedom.
Well, and if for no other reason, they're not so reliant on the relationship between the publications and the politicians and that type of thing, and they're able to be more adversarial. I think they're more fourth estate than what we have thought previously. I mean, you got the three estates, you got the judicial, legislative, and executive branches, and you got the fourth estate, and they're not meant to be friends. They're not meant to be partisans. They're supposed to be out there. And of course, if you get outside of the corporate media, like your friend in Cedar Rapids and like Greenwald and Tybee and yourself, I mean, folks, they're heroes of mine, and so is Laura Bellin. Laura, I'll give you a last word here, because we got to wrap up. We're just about out of time. Anything that we've talked about thus far, or anything you want to mention that I didn't get to?
No, I mean, I think that's it. I'm just going to be continuing my coverage. I hope to have more coverage of the state's coronavirus response and the use of funds to combat the coronavirus. So just keep an eye on that. But I do believe in follow the money. I believe in, I'm always welcome tips and suggestions from readers on things that might be worth investigating.
Laura, as always, Friday with Laura. God, I love that. I mean, I love all the podcasts, but I really enjoy this, and I learn a lot too. This is great. Thanks again, Laura Bellin.
Thank you, George.
Close out here by just coming back and asking people to look forward to those podcasts that I was talking about with Matt Tybee. That's a big one for me, folks. I mean, I even mentioned that I'm a little more nervous than normal, I guess, talking to Tybee, because he's really a hero of mine from the Rolling Stone, which I started reading when I was 15 years ago, folks. We're talking 50 years of following all of the great writers from the Rolling Stone, and he's carrying on that tradition. And then Gerald Posner, which has written great books, not only Case Closed that we were talking about, and the Kennedy assassination book, but he's got a new book out called Pharma. And you'll want to listen to what he has to say, not only because of the tentacles of the pharmaceutical industry and how it's become a fabric, a part of the fabric of American society, but these companies that are now coming out and promoting and giving you the information on these vaccines. They're all long-standing industry giants, all involved in this pharmaceutical thing, up to and including the Sackler family with Purdue Pharma. And you'll like to see that, I think, unwound a little bit on Podcast by George. We're going to have that up in just a few days. That one's already recorded. But this one's live. I appreciate you watching. Please follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and catch us on iTunes. I'll have the recorded version of this posted on the various platforms very shortly. But for right now, that's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.